Eurorack can be a really daunting thing to get into at first, because as the name suggests, it is modular, which means you have to build it piece by piece and component by component, module by module.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
And that requires a lot of planning and research and moving virtual modules around in modular grid somewhat unsuccessfully, and potentially passing away as soon as you look down at the estimated cost of even a relatively simple setup. Now, maybe you've been making music already with DAWs, other instruments, synthesizers, and you already have a good selection of sound sources. You're just really intrigued by CV and the idea that you can move things around by control voltage rather than having to do everything by hand. Well, it's funny I should mention it because I was in the very same situation just a few years ago. And my solution was to build a Eurorack effects rack. This way I didn't have to worry about building a synth from the ground up, and I could already use all of the sound generators and sound sources that I had at my disposal. I mean, I could always expand my system later if I decided to, right? And that leads me to today's topic, which is what's the best way to get sounds in and out of a Eurorack effects rack. You see, Eurorack needs a hotter signal than line level, and a much hotter signal than instrument level. So the trick really is to get sounds up to Eurorack levels, manipulate them through the rack, and then get them back down to line level to get them out of the rack, all while introducing as little noise as possible, which quickly becomes quite the issue you can quickly find out. Quickly. Well, I think I have some solutions for you. Boredbrain was kind enough to send me over 3 brand new modules that are going to address some of the issues that we just talked about. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, utility modules like this, they serve very important functions, but they don't generally excite me all that much until I really started to use them in my everyday workflow, and they have made my life so much easier, and they've really opened up the rack for me. And what these modules do really well is help your Eurorack system play really well with your other pieces of gear, and to those of us that do use a hybrid setup, that is really useful. So let's see what we can do with them. I don't know how well you can see these because the camera really needs to be sitting exactly where my head is, and that's not physically possible. So I'll put up some shots of the modules so that you can see the ins and outs and exactly what I'm doing. First up is the Unifx. So let's say, for instance, that you have a lot of really cool guitar pedals or mono in-out effects, like the Gamechanger Light Pedal, which is my absolute favorite spring reverb. I wish that it was a Eurorack module, I really do, but now it kind of is thanks to the Unifx. Now, not only does this get pedals in and out of your system, you have CV control over the mix knob. So let's get some things going. A quick word about the rest of the setup. I just have a couple of oscillators from the Trident being sequenced by the Hermod, and it's doing a bunch of random stuff, and I have that filtered through one of the Cinnamon filters, and that output is going directly into the Unifx, which is then traveling through the Gamechanger Light Pedal. So now I have a dry wet knob over that signal in my rack. It's fully wet. I have the dry turned all the way down on the light pedal because I want the fully wet sound coming out of the light pedal. And I can sweep back and forth. But because this is Eurorack, and CV is the reason we love Eurorack so much, I can have CV do that for me. So I have a signal from the voltage block coming into the Lapsus Os, which is just an attenuverter, and I'll show you why I have it running through that in just a second. And that is going directly into the mix CV input of the Unifx. So let me bring in that voltage and see what happens. So now if you can see, the voltage block is triggering that CV input. That is pretty cool. And I can use the mix knob as an offset to determine where that starts. That's the light pedal in tremolo mode. Ah, that's cool. Okay, now the cool thing about certain pedals today is that they include CV control, and the light pedal is no exception. There is an expression pedal input that also can accept CV, and that is going to control the rate of the tremolo in this case. So I have that coming from one of my quad LFOs, and that is going to be modulating the light pedal's rate. That's me controlling it by hand. Let me get some CV. Let's get some CV to do that for us. Pretty cool, right? Okay, awesome. So now you can start to see some of the possibilities of incorporating these kinds of effects in your rack. Everything becomes modular at this point. It's really, really cool. Now, the reason that I mentioned earlier that I have this control voltage from the voltage block going through an attenuverter is so that I can invert the signal, obviously. And why would I want to do such a thing? Well, in the case that I have it set up, I'm trying to get the Eurorack signals into the light pedal or into an external effect. Let's say we had a guitar or something that we were trying to get into the rack to manipulate that with all of our Eurorack effects. Well, we could do that too by switching it into Euro effects mode. Obviously, I don't have it set up that way today, but we can still use that to create a feedback loop, at which point the knob actually works in reverse. Okay, if I flip the switch and it's fully wet, you're not going to hear any difference. But as I start to dial the knob back, feedback. Another thing to note, I do have the output of this running into the filter 8 up here, and that's just to remove some of the highs because it can be a little abrasive with the feedback. Now let's say we don't want that happening all the time. We can get some negative CV going into this mix control, and that's basically going to bring that out periodically with the voltage block. So I'm going to go negative. So every once in a while we hear that feeding back. Okay, I've taken it back into the original mode that we were in, the pedals mode, because now I want to move on and talk about the next module, which I'm naturally suspicious of any module. I'm naturally suspicious of any module that has no knobs on it. It's just a personal thing, nothing against knobless modules, but generally I don't like you very much. This one though has become one of the most used modules in my rack since they sent it to me because I do love getting sounds from my audio interface into the rack. I have a lot of stereo pedals as a synth player, and this is just a send and return for stereo effects, and it allows you to get them in and out of your system with no noise that I've noticed whatsoever. It's really clean. I'm actually underusing this today because obviously it has 2 effect sends and 1 effect return, or receive as they call it. The receive is going to get the pedal's output up into Eurorack levels. So it has a positive 12 and positive 18 dB switch. And then your 2 sends are going to get those back down so that you can send whatever sounds are coming through your pedal and your rack out to other sources. And we have negative attenuators on those for negative 12 and negative 18 dB. So in this case, I am using my new baby, the Tasty Chips GR1. I'm getting it into the rack using the receive. However, the GR1 unfortunately does not have any inputs to directly record back into it, so I'm not using the sends to get sounds back into it, but that is extremely useful to have 2 sets of sends to send wherever you want to. So you could do parallel processing very easily that way. Or you could just use it as a really clean input to get line levels or instrument levels into your rack. So I still have that sequence playing. Let me bring in the GR1. Okay, so clearly we can very easily and cleanly get external sounds into the system with the Xchanger, which I don't think I mentioned the name of it before, but it's the Xchanger. And then finally, you may have noticed me already using the Monitr, which on the surface just looks like a really handy mixer / end of chain output for getting sounds out of your rack into your DAW or whatever. And it is that, but it also has some really nice features that I don't see on all output modules that I really think set it apart. We have a stereo output, obviously, in 1/4" format, and 2 stereo inputs. We also have a headphone out, which has this handy little switch in the middle where you can monitor the master or either of the 2 channels independently. So let's say you're doing it for live performance or something and you need a cue. You can use this to monitor whichever channels you want to, which is really handy. Master volume with some lovely VU meters there, which is always nice to see. And then level control over each of the channels. And this very nice mute output switch, which all mixers should have a mute switch in my opinion. So what makes this a little bit different? Well, it's the fact that you have, if you can see here, which this may be the only thing you can actually see in this camera, but we have 2 VCAs over each of the channels. That is really useful when you have CV, that you can run into the VCAs and do level changes and all kinds of creative things. What I think needs to happen is we need to use the planar, gives me joystick control, to blend the 2 signals using these 2 VCAs. So I'm going to bring the levels down on both channels. And I'm going to take the Y and plug that into the VCA of channel 2. I'm using a longer cable so that hopefully you can still somewhat see what's going on. And I'm going to take the X axis.
Yes, right there. There's the X axis.
And plug it into VCA 1. So that's going to be our tasty chips. So now if we go X, it's going to bring in the GR1. If we go Y, we get all this dynamic control over the levels. Now I also have the output from the light pedal running through the Monsoon, which is a Clouds clone, and that gives us some granularity over the spring reverb signal, which is kind of a trick that I like to use a lot. I think I stole it from R. Benny actually, of breaking up reverbs and reverb tails granularly. Got it. It's also worth noting that I'm running the output of the GR1 through a magneto to give it a little extra movement, and the output of that is going into another Boredbrain module, the EQ5, or EQX5, EQ times 5. And I'm really underutilizing that module as well because I'm just using it to shape this fat organ sample that I have in the Tasty Chips GR1 and give the spring reverb ARP thing some room to breathe. But the great thing about this module, every single frequency band has a CV control. That is awesome, and there are so many creative things to do with that, and I'm going to really dive into that maybe in a future video. If you're curious what this glorious organ sample is, that's actually from my last video, which is where I ran a pipe organ through a Moog Matriarch. Today I'm going to play a pipe organ through my Moog Matriarch, and we're going to see what happens.
Yeah, there it is! There it is!
And manipulated it through the Matriarch's filters, VCAs, and that glorious delay that it has. So if you want to check that out, I'll include that link in the end screen. You can also get these samples for free. So why not do that? So check out these Boredbrain modules. They are really useful. I've found so many uses for them. And I'm sorry to Boredbrain that I ever thought that utility modules were boring, because these really pack a lot of creative potential. And I have really enjoyed exploring them over the last few weeks. So thank you, Boredbrain. Thank you, Alex from Mass Distro. And I'm just gonna let this play us out.